The Chargers tight end group hasn't given us much to get excited about during the preseason, but they may have found something in second-year tight end Stone Smartt.
You are Locked On Chargers, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Chargers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, and welcome into the Locked On Chargers podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Wade, joined as always by my co-host, David Drogemeyer, and we've been covering the Chargers together now for 8 seasons, but this is our 6th year as a host of the Locked On Chargers podcast, bringing you your team every day. Thank you guys, as always, for making us your first listen today, and to make sure you never miss the show, go subscribe or follow for free on the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel, and listen wherever you get your podcast from. David, what do we got today?
Today, Daniel, we're going to talk about some of the tight ends. And behind Gerald Everett, there hasn't been very many tight ends on this roster that has instilled a lot of confidence with their play so far. Yeah. But Stone Smartt has showed some things that I think that we like. And then CJ Okoye, the story of training camp, the feel-good story. We tell you exactly what his pathway is and what his season could look like this year. And we get into our preseason surprises. Some of the guys that we did not expect have come out and showed us some things in the preseason.
Yeah, a lot of guys. I'm very excited to talk about CJ Okoye, though. It's turned from kind of a cute story into, hey, this dude might actually have something. But today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Last-minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. David, let's talk about the tight ends, because we've been yearning for someone to kind of step up to really make an impact in that room.
Shouting from the mountaintops.
Man, and you know, there's a lot to get into for this tight end group, and a lot of uncertainty, a lot of wild cards in this group. The only guy who sat out in the preseason is Gerald Everett, obviously, and Parham has had some mixed results, and we'll get to him. But I want to talk about Stone Smartt, because this was really the first kind of statement made by any non-Gerald Everett tight end so far during this preseason, and really through most of the offseason as well. There's no guy that just has kind of stood out head and shoulders above the rest, even though you feel like that would be Parham because he's 6'9". But Stone Smartt actually in this last game showed us something, David. Showed us a little glimpse of, okay, maybe there is a little something more than just generic tight end X, and I thought we actually got a little chance to see it against the Saints.
I agree. I think you look at Stone Smartt and what he did in that game, and I think you like what you saw. 3 catches for 42 yards, had the long of 18. That was a really good drive starter that kind of started one of the best drives that the Chargers had in that football game.
The first touchdown drive.
Yeah, the first touchdown drive. I mean, that touchdown drive doesn't happen if the Chargers don't get started fast and get that play started with Stone Smartt. And then I think the other thing that you really like about Stone Smartt's game is on another one of those touchdowns, he threw a key block that allowed Easton Stick to be able to cut off of that block and get into the end zone. And, you know, he was able to keep his hands inside, not get called for any penalties. So that was a very good play. And, you know, there's nobody really else that's made any kind of statements or done anything, you know, anywhere close to this kind of a positive, at least being able to build some momentum. I think that's why you like what you've seen so far out of Stone Smartt.
At least create any separation, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's, I think, the biggest thing is no one has really been able to do anything there. And he didn't have any catches against the Rams, right? So we'll see if he has some more production in week 3 of the preseason. But as a guy that's been with the Chargers now since 2022, I think you can see the development there. I mean, we talked about it before the show. Physically, he looks like a different player than when he showed up last year. I mean, he was a scrawny dude on a scooter because he got hurt right away.
Yeah, he looked like a former quarterback.
Which is what he is, right? He's a former quarterback. Old Dominion ended up transitioning into a wide receiver at some point and then ended up going into the NFL as a tight end. So the normal path to trying to get into the NFL, right? But he has exciting receiving skills. I think he could have actually had a much bigger game. I mean, there was one pass to him that got batted down. There was one that was behind him. He almost made a great catch on it. One, just another bad throw from Easton Stick where, you know, we could be talking about a 60 to 70-yard game in this one. I think it probably stands out a little bit more. But still, it stood out to me, you know, and there was a definite difference between, okay, he's not just a guy. He's not just getting wide open in the flats and catching, you know, 2 passes for 20 yards. He's actually going out running legitimate routes and making some chunk plays down the field. And not only that, but 2 of them were through pretty physical contact and found a way to come down with the catch. So I liked what I saw from Stone Smartt. I think a lot of this is going to come down to what the Chargers want to do roster-wise. Are they going to keep 3 tight ends? Are they going to keep 4 tight ends? Because I think we assumed 4, but they only kept 3 to start the 2022 season, and all those roster spots have to come from somewhere. So it's going to be really interesting to see. I think the run blocking, especially on the Easton Stick, run into the end zone, I thought that's one of the most encouraging things.
Yes.
But as a receiver, I think he does have some promise, and I think has separated himself from all the non-Gerald Everett and Donald Parham tight ends as far as...
Yeah, he looks like a player out there for sure.
2 guys we know that are going to make the team. But Donald Parham, man, it's hard to be excited, right? It's hard to get excited about it going into year 4 with what we've seen in the preseason. And obviously this game looks a little worse. He has 0 catches on 3 targets, has the 1 bad drop that would have been a touchdown. And I think what you're hoping for in a game like this, and in the preseason in general, right? Because now through 2 games, he has 1 catch for 13 yards. They're putting him out there. So obviously they think there's something he has to prove to them still, right?
Yeah.
And it's hard to say, especially as a guy who's been in the league, played in big, legitimate NFL games, that he's standing out as much as you would against kind of inferior talent.
You're right. He's not. And I expect Donald Parham to dominate out there against these guys, because this is a guy, as we are looking at the roster right now, Daniel, that he's a lock. He's a guaranteed.
Yeah.
He's your number 2 tight end. And, he's a guy that has incredible size and has some, some real skills in the open field. Like, he can really make people miss. But if you don't catch the football, you can't show any of those skills. So I think it's been a little bit underwhelming for Donald Parham. And, I don't want to get to the point to where, I just have the opinion of him being, he is who he's shown us to be. Yeah. And, if he doesn't go out there this season, in the regular season, and go make some plays and go really put up some consistent stat line week after week after week, then it might have to just be that Donald Parham is a guy that was a lot of potential but could never realize it.
It feels like that right now. And obviously this is a dude who was undrafted, ended up playing in the XFL before the Chargers signed him. Like, his story was already unlikely, and he's a very easy guy to root for, and I still am. It's just hard when you're that physically imposing and it feels like you're not kind of living up to the size. And I think that hurts him a little bit. And I think that the one other thing that we've talked about before is just, it doesn't seem like he's a consistent end zone weapon, which is one of the things you would think just by the pure size he has alone would be somewhere he could stand out against the rest. And we just haven't seen that kind of production. Last year, when he was targeted, Justin Herbert had like 140 passer rating. When they were throwing it to him, he was good. But it's still 10 catches last year, 20 catches the year before that, and a mostly healthy season. But he is your tight end too, and last year he missed 11 games. So, are you good with, if he goes down another 11 games, which I'm not predicting he will, then you have a bunch of wild cards like Stone Smartt beneath him. Or like Trey McKitty. And I think that's what is kind of concerning, is it's not just him as tight end 2, it's him as tight end 2 with the injury history and also knowing what's behind him. Because David, man, Trey McKitty, I don't know if we were super hopeful that we would see him have a huge breakthrough in year 3, because we kind of saw him seemingly regress a little bit in year 2. But man, he's been hard to find so far, and I think you were hoping, hey, maybe he can show something.
Yeah, and then when I do focus on him, and I do want to see what he does, in run blocking, he's missing blocks, and so it's like that's not what you want to see. Like the coaching staff sent him home with a list of things that he needed to improve upon. Obviously, being a key factor in the running game is chief among them. That's what he was drafted and brought in here to do. He was brought in here to be that blocking tight end, and he's been. Honestly, he was way overdrafted. I mean, he was a guy that probably should have gone in the later rounds.
Well, and that's what hurts him too, right? Like, if he's a 7th round pick, we're not probably judging.
We're not talking about him in the same light here. But he would be
100% on the roster. But the only reason we feel like he has a good chance to make the team this year is because he's a 3rd round pick. Is that fair?
Yeah, no, it's definitely fair for us to say that, but I don't think it's fair that he should just be given a roster spot, given his play. It just hasn't been good enough. And I feel like this is a position, as we get closer to this 3rd preseason game and getting closer to the season, that the Chargers have to absolutely look at upgrading. It's blatantly obvious that it is one of the weakest parts on their roster, and they have to see it.
I like Gerald Everett a lot. I mean, Donald Parham
at some point. This isn't nothing against Donald.
No, it's not. But if you have one guy you feel good about, that's, a place that's going to be a concern, and I hope it works out with Donald Parham. It's getting harder and harder to believe it's going to work out with Trey McKitty. And honestly, in the Brandon Staley regime, one of the outliers is a guy that it just doesn't feel like we've seen the development, right? It doesn't seem like we've seen the development over his first 2 seasons that we were hoping to see. he shouldn't only make the roster because he's a third-round pick, but it feels like that's the biggest thing. And the other part of it is it doesn't feel like anyone behind him has really stood out enough to go catch him, or get them past, what his draft position was. But there are other guys I want to talk about, including CJ Okoye, one of the stories of the offseason, the international defensive lineman who has been making waves and just keeps making plays in these preseason games, David, to where now we have to wonder what's next for CJ Okoye. So we're going to talk about that coming up right after this. First, I need to tell you guys about the only place I'm buying any ticket to any event that I'm going to right now, and it's the Gametime app. Because buying tickets to your favorite events shouldn't be stressful, so go get Gametime, because Gametime is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. With killer deals on last-minute tickets and their best price guarantee, you can stop stressing over the tickets and getting hyped for the fun that you're going to have. Truly, you're trying to have fun. You want to go to an event. You don't want to be worrying about, hey, are my tickets going to pop up? Hey, am I going to have to go through 100 steps to get my tickets? You just want to get your tickets. And I mean, spontaneity is great with Gametime because it's the number one place for last-minute tickets. And the Gametime guarantee means you'll always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference, which is awesome. The other great thing about it is you get images of your seats before you buy, so you know exactly what you're getting with those tickets. So download the Gametime app and create an account and use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. All right, well, let's get, I almost did like a little Chris Collins or slide into the booth there. Let's get into CJ Okoye. Thank you to the everydayers who are checking us out today. We want to continue to try to bring as many different conversations about this team and look at as many different kind of angles to this roster as things kind of solidify this week. And like you always know, your team every day. I can't remember the last time we missed a day. We are here all the time, every day, the only Daily Chargers podcast out there. So thank you guys for supporting us as always. But hard not to support the guy we're talking about now, Dave, because we're talking about the Chargers' international prospect, CJ Okoye, who was part of the International Pathway Program, who got allocated to the Chargers as a defensive lineman, who they got a free roster spot for, right, to go and try out, right? He had never played an NFL game. He'd never played a football game before he started with the Chargers. Ever. He had no organized football experience at all. He came
insane to think about that.
The NFL unreal. Africa program, right? He was kind of sponsored by O.C. Umenyiora, a legend in the game too. But the problem is, David, is he's actually out there making plays, man. Like, it was crazy. He got a little bit more opportunity in the second game against the Saints in the preseason, and he went from 10 snaps to 25 snaps in game 2. They obviously are trying to get a better look of him. I mean, this dude literally thought his first sack in the NFL was not a sack. He thought because the quarterback got outside the pocket, even though he was still behind the line of scrimmage, it didn't count as a sack anymore. He said on the Rich Eisen show. That's a great interview there. But it's just crazy to see this dude, David, with as raw as he is, doing what he's doing right now.
It's just so wholesome. It's just it's so wholesome. It's such a great story. I mean, you see a guy who, a few years ago didn't have any knowledge of football at all. Had no idea what it was a basketball player, and then shows up at a camp, and basically OC and his people are like, hey, I think you should try out for football, give this a shot, and see what you're capable of doing. A year later, he gets signed by the Chargers, gets selected, gets brought over, and now he's playing in NFL preseason games when he had never played an organized football game ever before in his life. He gets a sack in his first game, which was an unbelievable story. But then he gets some more playing time in the second preseason game, and you start seeing a couple of things. I think he did a really good job of filling gaps. I thought that he had some pretty good tackles against the run where he was really showing some good strength, and he was getting pressure on the quarterback, which is insane. I mean, the only reason why the Chargers got an opportunity to get the ball back to go try and win that game against the Saints was because CJ Okoye was getting pressure on that third down play that caused that rush throw to give the Chargers offense another chance. So the fact that he's going out there making plays and showing you some things that make you feel like this guy isn't just somebody's out there doing his best. He's got some qualities that you think you can work on and really get better.
Yeah, and he's an athlete that's played other sports, right? So some of those things are a little built in, like the footwork. He said that he got into football because he was spotted just being super physical in the paint and playing basketball, right? And that's why, you're banging bodies in the paint. But the other thing to remember is just how big this dude is, right? I mean, he's listed at 6'6", 315. Me and Dave were talking, no chance he's 315, right?
Nah.
He's talking about being closer to about 330, which seems about right because he's a gigantic person. Like, I remember the first day of training camp, I saw him. One of the tweets I had was just like, I just saw him next to Morgan Fox. My God, the dude is a giant, right? But we have to see what that second sack dance is. We know that the players, I mean, that defensive line room, with as competitive as that is, the way they've rallied around this dude is truly inspiring in a lot of ways. It's really, really fun. But I think that for him, you know, and what happens next, that's an important part of this. So we wanted to go over with everyone, you know, kind of what it means if he gets waived, right? If he doesn't make the 53-man roster, because that's still an incredibly long shot. You know, almost 99.9% chance he's not going to make the opening 53-man team. That being said, there's a way he sticks around, and I think there's a really good chance he sticks around. So this is how it works. So when the Chargers do their cuts down to the 53, right now they get him as an extra roster spot. He's not taking up any space. If they waive him, right, he has to go through waivers, and it's hard to imagine another NFL team's going to sign him to their active roster at this point, right, with what he's shown. But if he does that, he can come back to the Chargers on their practice squad, and he doesn't even necessarily have to take up a spot on their practice squad. They can just get an extra body in him and have him on the practice squad being there to develop him. If they use the exemption, though, David, the catch is, he cannot play on any NFL roster in 2023, right? So you basically be stashing him there, but you can't call him up in an emergency. He would just be in a developmental role, or he just makes the practice squad in his own merit, right? And then he's just a regular practice squad player. Another team could pick him up. The Chargers could bring him up when they wanted to. So that's kind of what's next.
Yeah, it kind of reminds me a little bit of the Rule 5 draft in baseball. It's like, hey, you either got to keep him on the active roster the entire year or not. But the way this works here with this is exactly how you said. If the Chargers use an exemption on him, they basically have an extra practice squad spot. Unfortunately, he cannot be on the active roster at all the entire season, but they get to keep him and allow him to season. They get to keep him with the coaches, the strength and conditioning staff. They get to have him get bigger, get stronger, get smarter in the playbook. They also give him the opportunity to go out there and work with the scout teams, which is going to help him. Every single time he gets on the football field, it is going to improve his game. And I think you saw what he's already been capable of doing so quickly with just the short amount of time that he's been working with the Chargers. Imagine what an entire year is going to be able to do with him. And then you can come back next season and really maybe give him a legitimate shot to make the 53-man roster.
Yeah, I mean, it would be really interesting to see what his body just would look like after, you know, spending this entire season with the Chargers. But I think the other thing here, David, is like, right now it feels like the bare minimum is that they use the exemption and stash him on the practice squad. Maybe they feel highly enough about him that they just have him on the regular practice squad because they think they're going to bring him up at some point this year. The thing about that is, like, even with what we've seen, I still think it would be incredibly unlikely that you're going to see CJ Okoye get into a game this season, right?
Yeah.
That being said, if he has a full season and they can get this dude on the cheap who ends up being, you know, someone who on day one I saw doing the most basic drills. Truly.
Yeah.
I was watching him separate from the rest of the defensive line working on, like, stuff I did in high school, right?
Yeah.
Like, very, very basic stuff. To see that dude going out there and, like, not only that, but, like, he's moving dudes around. Like, the technique is not there, right?
No.
But just physically, he's pushing
the
dudes
raw
around.
Strength and power, it definitely is there. I mean, that guy's a bulldozer.
And at this point, David, it's hard to imagine that he's not with the Chargers for this season in some capacity.
Yeah, I definitely feel like he is. I mean, just the way that the international, you know, player program works, the international pathway program works, it favors him staying with the Chargers. Yeah. I mean, this is really an awesome situation for him and for the team because I feel like he gets an opportunity to learn, right? Like all the things I said before, and the Chargers have an opportunity to take somebody who has, you know, they can see visibly has talent, has some tools to work with, and see if they can really transform him into somebody who can, you know, even make it as somebody who's a part of their defensive line rotation. If even that happens, this is a major, major win, not only for the Chargers, not only for CJ, but for the International Pathway program as well.
And it feels like at the very least we're going to see him stashed there, right? Which is cool, and it keeps the story going. And no matter what happens, even if that doesn't happen, it would seem hard to believe. I don't know what the downside would be of having an extra camp body and developing a dude who's obviously shown some promise. It'd be really hard for me to believe that's the way it's going to go down. And you might get something out of it. But it's already, no matter what, it's an incredibly huge win, not just for CJ Okoye, but all the other people out there in other countries, that are super athletes that say, hey, I could do that. I can go play American football. And you just bring more good athletes into the sport. The Chargers, super open to that already. A couple of Canadian players like Josh Palmer are already on the roster. So very excited about CJ Okoye. But he's not the only guy on that defensive line that has stood out. There's a couple of preseason surprises we didn't see coming, like Christopher Hinton. Scott Matlock was kind of all over the field, and you guys know how I feel about Scott Matlock. But there's some also other preseason surprises. Zach Bailey. That's a guy we didn't really, expect anything from. Maybe there is some interior offensive line depth to feel good about. We're going to talk about some of those preseason surprises coming up right after this. First, I need to tell you guys about eBay Motors because our partners at eBay Motors have teamed up with Locked On Fantasy Football host Vinny Iyer to bring you some of the best fantasy picks each week, all season long. Whether you're prepping for a draft or scouting the waiver wire, every week, we're going to provide you players that are a guaranteed fit on your roster. So with draft prep underway for the upcoming season, let's see who Vinny has picked out for us on this week's eBay's Guaranteed Fit Fantasy Picks of the Week. Are you looking for a player to take in fantasy football drafts who will spark his new team's offense and also help speed you to victory? Then use a luxury pick on Bears wide receiver DJ Moore. It didn't take long for the former Panther to go 0-60 after his big trade, cruising into an easy role as Justin Fields' new go-to guy. Don't know if you guys saw the screen pass from DJ Moore he took from 5 yards behind the line of scrimmage to the house. That's obviously exciting. But Moore was fine in Carolina, but he will perform better than ever while dominating targets from a young QB in Chicago. Vinny Iyer from Locked On Fantasy Football is going to help you win your fantasy championship this year. And eBay Motors knows a championship team is about each player being a perfect fit, and it's the same with your vehicle. With eBay Guaranteed Fit and over 122 million parts and accessories for your vehicle right at your fingertips, you can make sure your ride stays running smoothly. Air filters, brakes, taillights, batteries, alternators, shock struts, whatever you want, eBay Motors has it, and they'll make sure it's the right fit for your car because with eBay Guaranteed Fit, it helps you understand exactly what part you need for your vehicle the first time. So go forth, switch gears, crank the AC, and say goodbye to sweating if your ride needs a little fixing up because now you know you'll always be set up for success from the get-go. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, everything your vehicle is calling for is just a click away. For the parts and accessories that fit your vehicle, just look for the green check. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices at ebaymotors.com. Chargers Country, let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. All right, David. Well, let's talk about some other preseason surprises because there's definitely some guys that I think are worth talking about that I think we truly didn't see coming. And I think one of the guys on the defensive line that had a little bit of time with the Chargers last year and kind of picked up where he left off was Christopher Hinton. It's a super competitive defensive line battle going into the season, especially with Austin Johnson still coming back from injury. Tito Abonia is still a huge question mark at this point. But Christopher Hinton's been one of kind of the pleasant surprises and one of the reasons I think we feel good about, hey, this competitive defensive line group is going to turn out to, good guys at the bottom of this roster.
Absolutely. I mean, you have more qualified bodies in that room, so the best is truly going to rise to the top. And I think for Christopher Hinton, some of the things that I liked, 73.9 run defensive grade, which is one of the highest on the team. He has 3 tackles, and 2 of those went for stops, so for run stops, and also bringing some pass rush as well. 2 hurries and a sack to his name. So I think Christopher Hinton is quietly having himself a very, very good preseason and training camp.
Yeah, and he came in a desperation role last year at the end of the season, too, and looked decent in a very small sample size. So I think he has, a leg up on some of the guys in that room as far as, hey, if there's one guy that kind of makes the roster at the end of the roster, maybe he could be that guy. I mean, they brought Nick Williams in for a reason, right? I mean, he's a veteran that has kind of already proven his worth. And there's other guys like Gerard Clark, who's had some really good moments as well. Yeah. I mean, it's super competitive. CJ Okoye, another guy. Scott Matlock had some moments, though, and that's a guy that I think is important, David, because we know he's going to make the team.
Yeah,
right? He's going to be on this team regardless. Even as a 6th-round pick, I'm going to go out on a limb and say he's safe. He had some moments in this game, David, that could get you really excited. I don't want to fall for the bad PFF score on this guy. I mean, I thought he really showed himself and showed some flashes of why the Chargers took him.
I mean, Scott Matlock, one of the things that he brings to the table every single time he steps on the field is definitely the glorious red beard. But also it's the relentless motor. It's the relentless motor that he brings every single day, every single play, from whistle to whistle. This guy is running to the football and balls to the wall. He's giving it his all. And I think that type of motor is going to help you on your defensive line. It's an attitude thing, but it's also an effort thing. When you see somebody giving their all, giving their max effort every single play, you can't help but want that to rub off on you, and you can't help that to rub off on you. So I think that effort also, you just displayed some, fantastic instincts on the outside, not allowing a screen pass to go for what seemingly would have been a first down.
Yeah,
again, all effort, and did not allow his size to fool anybody or stop him from making that play.
Yeah, and his stat line really should have been 3 tackles and 2 tackles for loss. He did have one bad moment where he missed a tackle that would have given him his second tackle for loss. But he did have 1 tackle for loss. He made a play in the backfield. And, like I said a little bit at the end of last night's show, if you heard Brandon Staley in the press conference after talking about how impressive he thought it was that Scott Matlock chased a running back down from behind on a screen pass.
Effusive.
You could tell kind of how they feel about him. And it's great because, like I said, he's making the team regardless. So you want to see that from him, right? And I think, we've seen some really, really good development in a very short amount of time with Scott Matlock, a guy who I thought showed a lot of good things in college. But another guy kind of came out of nowhere, David, edge rusher Carlo Kemp. Quietly, I guess, he's had 8 pressures over 2 games, 2 quarterback hits, and additionally a sack over those 2 games.
Yeah.
Some holes in his game for sure. Hasn't been a big impact player in the running game, David, but I think a guy... he had 4 pressures in over 116 snaps and somewhere around that in 2022. This year he has 8 in about half of that. So there's some obvious development there, and the dude definitely is showing, hey, he has some pass rush chops.
He does. I think one of the things that comes to mind with Carlo Kemp is this guy brings some physicality. He brings that attitude where he's going to run through the quarterback. I've definitely seen that. In his rushes, he's rushing with some violence, which I like. I like that from any kind of defender. But yeah, I think that's what he's done. It's been a very good training camp.
A practice squad guy, right? Because that's
preseason.
He's not fighting for a legitimate roster spot.
No,
right?
but he showed the ability to rush the quarterback, and I feel like just the competition in the edge room, it definitely looks much, much better, and he's a part of that.
He is. And let's talk about a couple offensive linemen, because I know Brandon Staley, first of all, flamed the offensive lineman after the game in defense of Easton Stick, and I think that's partially because he knows Easton Stick kind of has to be that guy regardless.
Yeah.
But I thought, Zach Bailey has quietly been a really, really good, kind of in the midst of maybe some lesser players that he's taking the blame for in some instances, right?
Yeah.
He's been super solid, David, and I think, has turned himself. He's a guy that was in 5 teams in 4 seasons, bounced around a ton before ending up with the Chargers in 2022. He's had a really nice offseason so far, to the point where, hey, he's a legitimate roster guy for this team, maybe even in place of Brendan Hymas.
Yeah, I definitely can see that. Zach Bailey, an 81 pass block grade, the second highest, only 1 pressure given up in 42 pass blocking snaps against the Saints. Yeah. Only 2 pressures and 1 sack given up in 63 pass blocking snaps entire preseason. So also the second highest run blocking grade on the team with a 72.6. So a really well-balanced game that Zach Bailey is bringing to the table, and I think you have to like what you see. The numbers definitely show that he's been a very good part of this offensive line, at least the backup offensive line for the Chargers.
Yeah, for sure. He was definitely moving dudes out of the way in the running game, right? And I think that Stephen Hagelin, guilty as charged, brought up a good point. Hey, let's see what this dude can do at tackle, right? Foster swelled up and down in the preseason, not a ton to inspire confidence there. Zach Bailey is a guy who has some tackle flexibility. I'd much rather see him go out there and take every single snap than see Austin Pleasance. It's no offense to Austin Pleasance. It's just at this point, it's almost impossible for that dude to make the team. Let's see what you have in someone like, Zach Bailey playing tackle. I also think in this game, I wouldn't be totally tricked on Jordan McFadden. I know he only got okay grades. He's been really, really good as a pass blocker. You talked about Zach Bailey. He's only given up 1 pressure in 63 pass blocking snaps.
1.
So that's really, really nice to see. Same amount as Zach Bailey, at least as far as snaps so far, and he's only given up 1 pressure. And I thought, he does have the lowest pass blocking or run blocking grade of any Chargers offensive lineman. But I think it seemed overblown. I thought he had some good moments in the running game. When I went back and watched these linemen today, I thought he had good moments. And I think for a guy who's transitioning to guard to the next level, I think he's absolutely showing some promise. And I think the biggest thing for him is just hitting guys at the second level. And that can be really hard when you're playing a different position, because when you're playing tackle, the angles change. Where your landmarks are change. So the physicality, I don't think, has been a problem at all in the running game. He's plenty physical to be there. I think eventually he will really settle in and potentially be kind of a nice part of this interior backup, the interior line depth. So it'll be interesting to see. But that is going to wrap things up for today's show. We do want to do a Chargers mailbag. There is a Chargers practice tomorrow, too, so we'll see what comes out of that. But make sure you guys get your questions in or call into the voicemail line at 323-524-7924. You can hit us up on X at LockedOnLAC and get your question there. We'll put a post out, or you can hit up David Drogmeyer's DMs at DroTalkSD or my X at Dan Talk Sports. You can also hit us up on Instagram or on our Locked On Chargers Facebook page. We're at Locked On Chargers on Instagram. And you guys can hit us up any of those places. And the other great thing is we post the show to all of those places every day. So thank you guys for checking out today's show. To make sure you never miss it, go subscribe or follow for free to the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel and listen wherever you get your podcast from. But love talking about all these guys, a ton of storylines, especially at the bottom of this roster, and love just having these kind of different conversations about some dudes we didn't think we'd be talking about. So we will be back with you guys tomorrow, getting a little bit into mailbag and whatever comes out of Chargers practice. But until then, guys, take it easy and go Bolts.